Hello there. I hope you're well wherever you are. Now, this week a large number of items came across my path. At the end I think I'll read out some stories of Kathryn Hulme and her milliner friend driving around Paris in an open-top American roadster in the 20s and 30s and their experiences with Gurdjieff. And I've also got a very interesting article that was quite hard to find by James Moore, who was an English student of Gurdjieff. He strongly criticises the direction that Madame de Salzmann took in the 1990s to derail Gurdjieff's teaching. After my comments on the Jews in the last few weeks, it struck me that people like to be Jewish because Judaism was 4,000 years ago and there's nobody around to stop you. And in the same way, Americans today find great pleasure in becoming Taoist Sufis and followers of the Gurdjieff work because there's nobody around to stop you. And so you can say and do whatever you want. And my suggestion to you is that you should never follow anybody unless you see them working very hard themselves, which is what Gurdjieff did. It also struck me this week that if you really understand something, then the answers are forthcoming. And that the great drama of human culture is not based on anybody understanding or doing or remedying anything. It is just a theatre. Just as Gurdjieff described last week, some take the part of being a leader, some of being a follower, some of being an antagonist, some of being a hero, and they make a great noise just like a bunch of monkeys in the trees, and they are all satisfied. That is the level of humanity. They are not going anywhere. They are not working on their salvation or saving the world or destroying the world. They're not doing anything. They're just like baboons in trees. If they really understood what the problem is, they could solve it, because to understand, to see the problem is to see the solution. It comes together. I wanted to talk about various errors that I see, not only in practices that people do in the name of the Gurdjieff teaching, but also in various other traditions. Let me start with Buddhism. They talk about emptiness. Their goal is emptiness. It seems to me this is a tragic error. With their practices, what they do is they dissolve the many eyes, that false self, ego, but they do not discover the real I. In fact, they don't even know that it exists. As Gurdjieff said, the energy inside the being travels upwards through 3 stories. And to dissolve the false crystallizations does not necessarily mean that you discover your real I. And so the Buddhists, after they decrystallize the many eyes, they're left with a kind of empty being that does not sense their soul, does not really sense who they are. Another doctrine the Buddhists have is that everything is impermanent. But I would ask, how can you know that? To know that, you have to be standing on a platform that is stable and that you can observe from. And then you can observe things. And you can say, because this platform is stable, then I can see and be sure that everything out there is impermanent. That's the only way. And if the platform is stable, then the question then becomes, what is the platform? And the platform is your real I. But they don't ask those second questions. The stupidity of these people is off the scale. The truth is, if you look through human history, it is the history of societies rising and falling, seemingly without any kind of control, masses of people dying, knowledge being lost, warfare and destruction, and, of course, all the time, humanity is marked by having this incredible bravado They all talk like they know what they're doing. Similarly, most people who are interested in Gurdjieff's teaching have, as James Moore will describe, discarded all of the interesting stuff, the cosmology, and they want to talk about their fucking feelings. In other words, they do what is called the psychological work. But this is the same. The psychological work involves paddling around in that pool of many eyes and talking about your feelings or the feelings that you don't want. And it's sort of playing backwards and forwards with them. But again, they miss the real I. They have discarded the need to do hard physical work. And by not actually doing that with their actual bodies in the actual physical fucking world, they prevent the real I from emerging in the center of the body. And it doesn't really matter then what they do with the psychological work. There is no real I to take over. And that's why I say, let me see what you have done today before you speak. Let me see what you have done with your hands. Only then will I open my ears to what you have to say. And let's talk about Gurdjieff. In about 1930 or 1932, he lost his school, his institute, at the Priory, a large mansion and grounds that he had bought just south of Paris. It was a disaster, and it's beyond me how he couldn't make that work. He could have turned it into a hospital, into a nursing home, into a retreat centre. He could have organised his students to manufacture anything from automobile parts, which were popular then, or fashions, or wartime materials. I mean, he was certainly capable of doing all of that, wasn't he? And I'm sure it would have been great fun for the many English and the many American who were very interested in his teachings to come over to Paris for a few months and do some hard physical work, make something, sell something, and he could have saved the Priory. It's really beyond me how he failed, and I think he must have had certain personal problems. He, as a young man, was forced to continuously change jobs. His father wanted him to learn resilience. But I think this became a bit of a drug with Mr. Gurdjieff, and he thought only about keeping the level of stress at an extreme level the whole time, which I think is too much. And as a result, the incredible depth of material, the cosmological material, and even the music and the dances, who is here to receive it? People don't even mention it anymore. That's very sad. Anyway, let's move on to James Moore. He was an Englishman and a student of Gurdjieff, and he wrote an interesting article called Movable Feasts, in which he criticizes what Madame de Salzmann did in the 90s to damage the Gurdjieff teaching. I'm going to read some of it out. I'm afraid he's got a very flowery style, which, if you ask me, is a way for him to slightly conceal the venom that he has. It's particularly interesting because it was extremely hard to find, and I noticed that certain people had tried to conceal it, and therefore I will unconceal it for you. I'll just give you a flavour of the beginning. He says, "You cannot step twice in the same new religious movement. A new religious movement moves. Stasis is not on offer. The founder's pipe dream, his grand chimera, is evangelical dynamism with canonical arrest. Beware of novel affairs, for surely all innovation is error." Let me skip on a couple of pages to get to the juicy stuff. He says that a lady called Madame Lanes, who was very close to Gurdjieff, after she died, then he says, London's grieving members took heart from unchanging group modalities, continued visits by the revered teachers Henri Tracol and Maurice de Selle, and above all Madame de Salzmann's ongoing supervision, seemingly augured doctrinal and methodological stability. Yet the augury misled. The work's familiar form increasingly delivered a new content. Individualized teaching was out, general doctrine was in. The wood was everything, the trees nothing. Fronting the new doctrine was an oligarchy-led modulation of idiom, from active to passive voice. The pupil no longer remembered himself, but was remembered. No longer awoke, but was awoken. Pupils did not, need not, could not work. They were worked upon, even while they slept. However perverse seems an etymological reading of tradition as betrayal, the iconic Gurdjieff avatar of effort now necessarily fell to be deconstructed by his eponymous organizations. Thus, at a time when the crypto-Gurdjieffian journal Parabola continued celebrating a vast pantheon of religious, mythic and legendary figures, Dr. Michel de Salzmann, Madame de Salzmann's son, warned of Gurdjieff himself, that there are no golden legends to be built around him. Then, if not legend, perhaps sober history was admissible? Seemingly not. Gurdjieffian historicity was equally unwelcome in Paris because it's rather idolatrous. Effectively discarded with both the heroic and historical Gurdjieff was the entire apparatus of his Systema Universi, the ray of creation, the table of hydrogens, the step diagram, the food diagram, the enneagram. They and their unwelcome implications simply vanished from politically correct discourse. With this final solution to the problem of the work's effort-saturated cosmological matrix, the pupil's presumed new experience of being worked on and being remembered was posited in a mystical illuminism which hinted encouragingly at a supernal look of love, albeit not specifying its presumably divine, demiurgic or angelic provenance. In a doctrinal corollary of seismic implications, fusion with this supernal source replaced individuation as the pupil's goal. However cloudy at the theological level, the new grace paradigm was lent exotic methodological specificity. In regular communal sittings, the highly energized love from above professedly entered the pupil's subtle body through an aperture at his crown, Kundalini's lotus of 1,000 petals, as he waited with eyes closed in still sustained and intensely refined attention. The grand trophy of revisionism was Gurdjieff's mythopoetic magnum opus, Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. That this book marshalled Gurdjieff's profoundest insights, that he himself over decades honed the English text, refining its nuances and cadences, that he saw it into publication, that generations of Gurdjieffians had accorded it quasi-scriptural status, was now outweighed by a single fatal defect. Grace did not suffer to render intelligible the author's deliberate stylistic opacity. The reader's confrontative effort was required, and effort was passé. A suitable American team, mandated by Madame de Salzmann herself, contrived to clarify the verbal surface, to make the reading smoother, the material seem lighter, more approachable. In 1992, the Baudelairized version was published and hyped. Gurdjieff's authentic text jettisoned, objection made light of. In the footnotes it says, within the Gurdjieffian literary oeuvre, the basis for such a gratuitously salvific and Pentecostal spiritualization is supplied not in canonical works, but by the heterodox and eclectic J.G. Bennett. See his theories concerning the Great Work and Christ's second coming in glory as elaborated in The Dramatic Universe. He's right, J.G. Bennett was very dramatic. I've been to several official group sittings in England, and I found them to be just like James Moore said. People sat silently, almost in terror of the authority of some nobody who seemed to be leading the group. I've personally been in many different types of groups and for many years, so it didn't intimidate me in the least, and I asked very straightforward questions. And my straightforward questions were not received very well. People didn't like their séance being disturbed. It felt a lot like you would imagine a Victorian séance over a Ouija board and waiting for miraculous words to pop out of the sky. To my mind, it has absolutely nothing to do with Gurdjieff's very physical, very demanding, very practical teaching. Nothing at all. And because these people don't like to do any real physical work anymore, they don't experience their real I. And therefore, the cosmology doesn't mean anything to them, because the cosmology is only something that the real I can feel. If you listen closely, you will see very clearly that when people talk about the centers or the hydrogens or any of these other things, or, God forbid, the fucking Enneagram, for these people it's all just a game. They don't do any physical work, they don't strain themselves, they don't struggle, they are not religious, and Gurdjieff's work remains where it's always been. You have to dig up the dog, but it is there. And these people are going to die like a dog because they aren't there. It's very important to read the autobiography of various spiritual people, because then you learn more about what a real spiritual journey is like. Well, let's join Kathryn Hulme and her milliner friend Wendy in Paris in the 1930s and their first encounter with Gurdjieff in an American open-top Packard Roadster. Shortly after the new year of 1932, Wendy cabled that she would sail from San Pedro aboard a French freighter through the canal to Le Havre, bringing with her a 2-ton Packard Roadster with de-tricked body and convertible top. It was well she gave me a month to prepare for her return. I ran out of the hotel to send an answering cable and threw away my purse somewhere along the Rue Jacob on the way to the post. Every document I owned, except mercifully my passport, was in it. Carte d'identité, French driving license, everything needed, in short, to resume my job as Wendy's driving companion. I told the police that I must have dropped the purse in the excitement of certain bonnes nouvelles just received, but I knew that I had probably opened my hand and let it fly as I had hurried along, talking to myself like a Frenchman and making palms up gestures in the air. Mon Dieu, a 2-ton Packard in these narrow streets, is she mad? I could not see myself doing this, but knew it must be so. Months of stoic self-observation had flown out the window on receipt of that cablegram. Wendy's freighter emerged from the Channel fogs at 4 o'clock on a February morning and warped in slowly to her mooring at the far outer docks of Le Havre, where I had been waiting since midnight with seagulls and stevedores for company. 12 heads showed over the bulwarks of the forward deck. I looked for the one with the fanciest hat and began to wave to it as her voice fluted down. "Katie, Katie, oh, I knew you'd be here no matter what." She felt like a bag of bones which even her new Fitch fur coat could not pad out to human proportion. The Packard Roadster, lifting out of an aft hold, looked like the entire ship's engine being removed from hull to dockside. We talked through the dawn while the rest of the baggage came off, and presently, as I had arranged, a representative of the Royal Auto Club drove up with gasoline for the car and all necessary papers to admit it into France. A sleepy customs agent made a token inspection of her smallest bag, chalked his clearance on the rest, and we were off, soon after sunrise, on the Grande Route Nationale that led to Rouen, 56.5 miles to the south. The Packard made it easily in an hour, getting us into Rouen just as the hot croissants from the town's bakery appeared on the breakfast tables of the Hôtel de la Poste. We loitered the rest of the way to Paris, talking about Jane Heat's study group. I'll never know what whimsical notion made Wendy plead for us to stop in the Café de la Paix before going to the Left Bank Hotel, where a cosy suite awaited her. The notion caught her in the maelstrom of the Place de la Concorde when I was trying to maneuver the huge car over to the right toward the bridge that led to Faubourg Saint-Germain. "No, no, keep left," she cried. "We go first to Café de la Paix." I battled my way back into the vortex to head towards the opera and the sumptuous old café on the corner of the square. There was, unbelievably, a Packard-sized parking space just before the café's main entrance, and I backed out 2 tons into it with 2 turns of the wheel. Wendy said, "Bravo for you, Katie." We pushed through the revolving doors into the warm splendour of the world's most famous café, and saw unoccupied at that crowded aperitif hour our favourite banquet table in the second salle that faced out on Boulevard des Capucines. "It was waiting for me," Wendy said. The whole café, as a matter of fact, seemed to be waiting for her. Newspapers were lowered and monocles adjusted as she passed by in her elegant coat of Fitch. The only male in the section who did not look up was a shaven-headed waiter bent over his work at a table opposite. The waiter remembered Wendy. He gave her a welcome back to Paris and said, "Amontillado sherry, comme toujours, madame." I ordered café cognac to pick me up from my pre-dawn vigil. After our refreshments I relaxed and café gazed with Wendy. She ticked off every chic woman in view by the name of the couturier who had costumed her and the modiste who had hatted her. I always enjoyed her specialist side and the amazing way she took women apart, exchanging the hat of this one with that one to make both look lovelier. Her musical voice tinkled on like a fountain whilst she looked around at the gold Corinthian pilasters, upholding lofty ceilings frescoed with sky scenes and cherubs, at the busy murals in wall medallions aglow with indirect lighting, at the gold-draped show window giving out onto the crowded terrace in the boulevard beyond. Then she turned her big eyes on me and asked, "However could Mr. Gurdjieff concentrate in a place like this?" I saw she wanted an answer. The man on the opposite banquette was still busily writing. I nodded towards him and said, "Some can. That one, for instance. I don't believe he has looked up since we came." He looked up as I spoke, and I saw the countenance I had pieced together fancily from Jane Heap's words. Dome-like shaved cranium, large black eyes, and handlebar moustache curled up at their ends. My whole inner being froze to attention. Presently he found the phrase he sought and bent again to his work. On the green velour banquette that sagged slightly under his weight, I saw folded beside him a black winter overcoat with caracole collar and a Cossack cap of the same tightly curled lamb's wool. But that must be Gurdjieff. I could have bitten off my tongue, for Wendy pushed out the table, arose and said, "Come, we'll go right over and speak to him." We stood before his table waiting for him to look up. He made us wait for an interval that felt like eons, then slowly raised his head and gazed at me with the most beautiful eyes I have ever looked into, even slightly angry as they were scowling. "Excusez-moi, monsieur. Êtes-vous Monsieur Gurdjieff?" My voice dwindled as I hurried on to explain that we belonged to a small group meeting each week in Montparnasse to study his teaching with Miss Heap. His eyes narrowed as if regarding something very small, then his glance moved on to Wendy standing taller behind me. "Heap," he rumbled. "Miss Heap." It took me a moment to realize he was repeating Heap with a hard G for the H, which his Russian tongue could not aspirate. I said, "Oui, monsieur." Then he nodded and said, "See it." He thrust aside his overcoat and made a place for Wendy beside him on the banquette, indicated my old vacant chair for me to pull up, and invited us for a coffee with him, or whatever else we might prefer. Wendy did most of the talking. She told him how we had stumbled, so to speak, into Miss Heap's circle, how she had made notes and had always wanted to meet him since she believed in going direct to a source. She was a businesswoman, she said, as if that explained everything. Hands as well as voice conveyed her delight for the unexpected encounter. He studied her as she chatted confidently. Did he understand a word of her rapid, breathless English? He offered her a long Russian cigarette and placed one in his own short holder made of some sort of briarwood, dark and knotty. He accepted the light from me without looking my way, then said, "Business, aha! I also am businessman." I know now that we must have caught him in a moment of weariness after writing for hours in the blank book that lay on the table beneath his brown fingers, flattened at the tips like a musician's. Unknown and uninvited, we must have appeared when he needed what he was later to term for us idiot relief, a most useful expression for anyone toiling to communicate through the written word. I marvelled at the way Wendy chatted on unabashed, then listened to him seeming to understand his abbreviated English, which was not pidgin as some reports had suggested, but simply nouns without articles preceding verbs without adverbs. Presently he said to Wendy, "You have car?" And she pointed out the window to the Packard parked at the curb directly behind his mud-splattered sedan. He looked at the long, low-slung roadster, then turned directly to me and said, "You are chauffeur." I meant to speak up brightly and naturally like Wendy, but the full force of his regard caused me to blush and stammer. "He invites us to go to Fontainebleau with him this afternoon," Wendy said across the table. "We are to follow his car." Gurdjieff turned his eyes away from me for a moment to study Wendy registering pleasure at this prospect, and I got my voice back firm and strong in time to answer his next query. "You can follow?" "Yes, sir," I said, looking straight into his wonderful eyes. "I am very good at following." He instructed me to come to the cafe at 3 o'clock exactly, with night bag in the car. "And bring the thin one," he added, giving Wendy the name which summed her up for him. We arose, thanked him for coffee, and walked from the salle as if emerging from a royal audience. At the revolving door I looked back. I had to see Gurdjieff once again to believe that the encounter had really happened. With one leg pulled up beneath him oriental fashion to the banquette, he looked from a distance like a broad-shouldered Buddha, radiating such power that all the people between him and me seemed dead. In the car we sat for a moment to catch our breath, laughing nervously together for no reason at all. Then I told Wendy to memorize both number plate and rear end contour of the black sedan in front of us, which in exactly 3 hours we would begin following through the congested boulevards to the Porte d'Orléans, and thence south for 38 miles to an unknown destination in the forest of Fontainebleau. Now I'll just finish with this. I was listening to a man give a lecture about the Enneagram again, an hour-long thing, and at the end he seemed exhilarated, as if he had solved the final puzzle of life. But what had changed? Anything at all? He was just sitting down. What had changed? And I wonder why people are like this, why they put faith in words and don't do anything with their body. Isn't it because when you go to the educational system, you are bombarded, you are flooded with all sorts of ideas that have no relevance for you whatsoever? And over time, this sludge replaces your real soul and your real development. And as you get older, you just continue with that way of talking over things, talking outside of things, talking without contact of things. I see the Enneagram. And it is partly technical, but it is the kind of technical that a child understands from his inside. But once you see it, you know that you understand it, I can tell you that. One implication for the worldwide emptiness of people's words is that the truth remains where it always has been, and that the magic of life, and even Avalon, is not lost. It is waiting, as it always is, for men who understand what working really means and do it. Nothing is over, not by a long shot.
face was pale and wan. Oh, was it with a lord or duke or a knight, or a man of birth and fame? Or was it with one of my serving men that's lately come out of Spain? No, it wasn't with a lord, nor duke, or a knight, nor a man of birth and fame, but it was with Willy of Winsbury. I could bide no longer alone, and the king has called on his merry men all, by 30 and by 3. Says, fetch me this Willy of Winsbury, for hanged he shall be. But when he came, the king before, he was clad all in the red silk. His hair was like the strands of gold. His skin was as white as the milk. And it is no wonder, said the king, that my daughter's love you did win. For if I was a woman as I am a man, my bedfellow you would have been. And will you marry my daughter Janet, by the truth of your right hand? Oh, will you marry my daughter Janet? I will make you the lord of my land. Why, yes, I will marry your daughter Janet, by the truth of my right hand. Why, yes, I will marry your daughter Janet, but I'll not be the lord of your land. And he's mine.